So pray us in then.
I'm sorry?
Pray us in.
Oh, okay, hold on. I gotta put my television. I usually turn it off. Okay, here, you might as well see my face too. Holy Father, thank you for this very intimate time between the three of us to spend in your presence, Lord. I ask, Holy Spirit, come with us. I ask you to give us knowledge and wisdom, and to each and every one of us tonight, give us revelation and understanding and deep, 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 I don't know the word I want to use, feeling, deep commitment, deep understanding of what you're saying to us tonight. I ask that you give Matt the gift he so well has, the gift of understanding your word and the gift of explaining it so wonderfully. In Jesus' mighty name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I mentioned this in the email, but I had to break this up into two sections. This is like where there is so much to this story. And the story overall is verses 21 to 43. There is so much in here. If I have a place where I'm going off of this, but there's multiple different avenues that you can take from. Like if you want to see, Jesus in it, like in every aspect of his ministry, we can focus on this section and look at that. If we want to talk about faith, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight, you can dive into that there. You can talk about the resurrection. You can talk about miracles. There's so much that's happening in this set of passages here. And it's just like, the thing that I sent you guys out yesterday, I've already changed because I've already learned more diving into the certain aspects of it. So that's why we had to break it up into two sections, even though it is really one continuous story. And I'm going to have to remind everybody next week of where we are too, because they go they're intertwined. But we would be here all night if I didn't break this up the way that I did. So, kind of a recap, because I know you weren't here, Diane, last week. Jesus has just healed the demoniac. He, kind of taking a step back, he stills the sea. Here's the big storm. He finally gets to where he's going to go across the sea. He's into a Gentile territory, and he comes across the demoniac that has legion, right? Jesus casts out, restores this man to life, causes all of these issues. The Gentiles don't understand Jesus. They don't want him there. They chase him out. The demoniac tries to come with Jesus. And I watched this today in a sermon by John MacArthur, that this commandment by Jesus here to this man to stay and preach the word. This is Jesus's first commandment of an anointing of a pastor. This, and it's a Gentile at that. So this, we're starting to get, ramped up into the area of Mark. Jesus is as kind of like at the height of his ministry right here. And it's just, it's going to be basically nonstop from this point until we get to the resurrection. There's not a point that we really start slowing down. I think the first couple chapters we had points that weren't, all that exciting, and there was a lot of kind of setup of what Jesus was doing in his ministry. All that setup is done. Jesus is all in at this point, and it does not slow down. And that's kind of where we are right here. So we're going to cover 21 to 34 tonight. And so let me read this all the way through, and then we'll kind of break it down like we have been. I'll give you a little bit more background of where we are. So starts off verse 21 and says, "And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, 'My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be well and live.' And he went with him. and a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. And she heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, "If I even touch his garment, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." So, there's a lot that's already kind of happening in this story, right? So we get the initial setup. Jesus is back in he's back in Capernaum. Now, kind of spoiling a little bit one of the questions that I'll ask, but he's back in Capernaum at this point. And we get this sense he's basically immediately accosted by people. One of these men being Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, and we've got this little girl that's dying. Jairus is going to him. He's panicking. Any parent would, right? That this is not, she's got a cold, right? She's dying. This girl is on her last breath right now. And Jesus is like, you know what? I'll go. I'll take me to her. I'll heal her. And then we get this whole new thing that's starting to pop up, right? Of this woman with a discharge of blood. Comes basically out of nowhere as he's trying to get to Jairus's daughter. And so, like I said, this is only halfway through. This is basically cutting the story in half because we're really going to be focusing a lot on this woman tonight. But there's a lot here. So what kind of stands out to either of you of this part of the story of where we are?
Well, Matt, you see, there's definitely a ramping up of things. Things are really moving fast.
Yeah.
He's got an overwhelming crowd following him now. He's got a lot of people that believe in him because they all want something from him. Yep. This woman who touches him, just so much faith to know if she even lays a hand on him, she's going to. I'm sure we'll get to it, but there's some things that I know are probably symbolic in this.
Yep.
So as we get to it, you certainly can. I'm excited to talk more about it. What do you think, Marie? Denise.
Marie. Well, it's showing that he can do more than one thing at the same time too.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, there's a lot that we kind of see from him here, and I think go ahead, Diane.
You can also, sorry for interrupting, because it is quite exciting. You can almost feel that there is a what do we call it? Like almost a, how you feel when you're in a revival and something really profound is happening. I almost feel that there is something that's so profound that's happening here. And that Jesus, there's just so much excitement. There's just, finally people are getting that this man is truly unique and special.
Yeah, there's tension. I think is a good word for it, right?
I would definitely agree with that. There is a sense of tension, right? I don't even think it feels right to say excitement.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. Yeah,
and it's because remember we talked about this in the beginning of Mark. Mark is constantly presenting this question, right? Who is Jesus? Who is this Jesus? And we're starting to kind of, this is ramping up because everything that we hear, like every story really ends with us having to ask ourselves, who is Jesus? Who is he that can do this?
It's starting to take a life of its own.
Yeah.
Instead of Jesus creating the scenes, the challenges, the being so outspoken, it's kind of taking a life on its own. It's just moving along like a chain ladder.
Yeah. Like what do they call it? Like a chain reaction, right? Like a chemical
Yeah.
chain reaction is happening right now, and it's unstoppable.
Yes.
No one can. They're trying, right? We've already talked about this, right? That the religious leaders have already come up with a plot. They've been working with the Herodians. They are planning on stopping Jesus any way it takes. But obviously it's not working, right? This chain reaction is happening. Jesus can leave for X amount of time, right? And anytime he comes back, the crowd is still there waiting for him.
Exactly. That's very profound in itself. And the other thing that's profound to me is for the first time we see somebody in a position of power from the synagogue going to him
Yep.
for help.
Yeah. That we're gonna talk about that a little bit too, but that is something that's really important. So there's a literary device that Mark is using here, and it's kind of unique to him in the Gospels, and it's called the Markan sandwich, where he's kind of the Markan sandwich.
Marking?
Markan.
Marken.
A-N, like Mark Ann, like
Oh.
yeah, like a Pauline epistle, right?
Okay.
It's called a Mark
Oh,
Markan,
like
yeah, his name. So it's a sandwich, right?
Okay.
And so there's two pieces to this, right? And then there's this random thing that seems to happen in the middle. But when we look at this as a whole, it's not disconnected. It is all connected, and this is kind of where that attention and it comes from. And so I have this commentary here that talks about this, and again, this is why we have to break it up, because there's so much to talk about, but we can't do this separately. We have it's people for next week to really get the most out of next week are going to have to watch this video if they didn't come, just to fully understand this. So let me read this commentary. This is by Eckhard Schnabel, and it gives a really good overview of kind of what we're going to be looking at in the next 2 weeks. And he says the healing of the woman and the raising of Jairus' daughter form a double episode, another example of Mark's intercalation technique. He does this previously in Mark 3, 20 through 35. Mark inserts the episode of the woman with a chronic hemorrhage into the episode of Jairus' daughter. The intercalation has the effect of delaying the healing of Jairus' daughter, who is very sick and who dies before Jesus arrives. Several parallels between the two miracles stand out. Both recipients of the miracles are females who are in a hopeless situation. Both situations involve ritual impurity, blood flow, and death. In both miracles, a period of 12 years plays a role, the number of years the woman has suffered and the age of the girl. In both episodes, Jesus heals by touch and emphasizes the importance of faith. On the other hand, the intercalation of the two episodes may not be a literary device here, but an indicative of historical memory of events that happen in the sequence in which Mark narrates the two miracles. And so, in looking at the divine unity of the Bible, while this could be a literary device, but there's also a strong possibility that things happen just like this. And remember, this is Peter's eyewitness, right? That we're getting here. This is Peter, and we know Peter is here as we get later into the story. Peter is an eyewitness to this all of this event. So there is a strong possibility that this does happen historically, just as Mark is putting it, that God built this drama, this narrative, because they are so intertwined.
Yeah, we don't have any choice but to believe that, Matt, because you have to believe that the word of God is spoken through God as revelation to man.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that God would have intervened in any type of process in the Bible that didn't fit his narrative.
Yeah. Yep. So, like I said, I think that gives like a really good overview of kind of this narrative that we're in here right now.
Or even, Matt, think about the whole process. It may not have happened boom, 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 boom like that, but presenting it that way showed that those parallels.
Yeah.
I mean, that's that, that could be, with God's permission.
Right. Well, and like that, sometimes you do have to look at the Bible as, and we're going to actually talk about this because there is a seemingly inconsistency between the synoptic gospels here. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And really what it comes down to is when we're going to get differences like this, they're not irreconcilable, but it's a different perspective a lot of the times of who the person saw, like who the person was that witnessed it. This comes into the whole, aspect of, how special revelation works. And you're not a passive typewriter for God. God chooses special, individual people, right? And their own personalities and perspectives comes through in it. God's not sitting there, typing on a typewriter behind their head.
Well,
He's inspiring them.
Preaching are so different, right?
That's why
styles of preaching are so different.
Yeah.
Is because God doesn't want us all to be cookie cutter. And how these people everybody sees things differently. You and I could look at the same movie and see different things in it.
No, exactly. And so that's, why God, has this diversity of people that he will talk to through in scripture. And we're getting their own personal take on the situation. Right. And so that's why, but it also plays into the overall unity of the Bible, is that you have 66 books with 40 authors, right? And they're all telling the exact same story. They don't even realize they're telling the exact same story, but they are all telling the exact same story.
And even though there were 12 disciples that were chosen by God, not all those disciples weighed in on these events.
Yeah.
So God picked the people that could present it in a way that he wanted to present it, so to speak, even though those narratives are different. Yeah.
I mean, and really, when it comes down to it, we only have two gospels that were written by people that were actual apostles actively with Christ. People that, we could talk about, Mark Mark may have met Jesus. We're not sure. It's part of tradition. Luke never met Jesus. He was a Gentile doctor. He never met Jesus. And so that leaves us with Matthew and John as the only two that gave us that. But each of them had very different perspectives on it, on what they witnessed and how to put it about. Peter, probably wasn't, all that super literate, but he had Mark, and Mark was able to put things down into a way that they were preserved. And so Mark learned from Peter. We get Peter's, direct testimony here, but we also get, Mark's flavor on it as well. God has raised up these individual people because it helps us unify the story and get a better sense from all these different perspectives of what happened. And like we've been talking about, Mark is using this his entire gospel, that every time we get to a transition point, the reader should be left with asking themselves the question, who is this Jesus? Who is he? And it's all coming up to the same answer, right? That's the whole point of Mark's gospel, is that the farther and farther we get into it, the question, the answer to that question becomes more and more clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, before we dive, too much deeper into this, right? You kind of a refresher question of what is the purpose of Jesus's miracles, because this is going to be really important to what we're going to be talking about.
You're asking, I am assuming you're asking quite a deeper question than just the point that Jesus performed miracles to heal people, relieve people of torment, and yada yada.
It's deeper than that. It's deeper than that, right? There's a specific reason, and he tells us what this reason is.
Oh, all right, give us a hint.
All right, so Mark 2:10 is I'll read this out of here. This is when Jesus is healing the paralytic, right? Mm-hmm. And this is the first thing that he does in this is forgive the man's sins. right?
Oh, right.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Jesus forgives the man's sins. You know, there's all kinds of commotion about this, you know, right now. You know, everybody's looking, it's like, who does this guy think he is, healing
right.
sins?
The Pharisees all question that.
Yeah.
Right.
And then Jesus, you know, in Mark 2:10, looks at them and says, so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins,
Nice.
take up your bed and walk. Right?
Nice.
This is the purpose of the miracles, is to prove who he is and to build faith. This is really important on understanding what's happening here in this story.
Right. It all connects. Superman's not really much if he doesn't have his powers, right?
Yeah. So, you know, because anybody could go out and say the things that Jesus was saying, right? Anybody could do that. How do we know? How did the people then know that Jesus was who he says he was, that he was telling the truth? And that's why he did the miracles.
Right.
That was the whole point of it, is to prove who he was. And this is when he sent out his apostles, you know, the true original apostles, the only people that can really call themselves apostles. When he sent them out, he gave them the same authority to prove that what they were saying was true, that they were actually sent by Jesus to preach the word. Right? This was it. Paul calls it the sign of the apostle. That they would be able to heal and cast out demons and do all of these things. Mm-hmm. And it was, again, it's to build the faith so people would listen to the message, to listen to the gospel, and to prove the authority of Jesus and who exactly he was. So keep this in mind as we're starting to dive into this, because, you know, there's at the core of this, right, is the two miracles, right? We didn't read about Jairus's daughter being revived from death yet, you know, but, you know, we've read this before. We know that's what's going to happen, but we see that the woman's been healed of her ailment for 12 years, and then we have the miracle of the girl being raised from the dead, right? So
so there's some significance with Jesus's resurrection here too.
Yeah,
of course.
But we're gonna have to talk. Well, that's a next week conversation right now, right?
Okay.
But okay. So I kind of already, you know, talked about this, right? But like, where is Jesus right now?
You mean physically?
Physically in the story. Where physically is Jesus?
I don't know. Where is he?
He's in Capernaum.
Okay.
Yeah. We get this from the parallel passage in Luke, where, you know, we're told that Jesus returned, right? So where was he before that? He was in Capernaum. This is right in chapter 4, when we were covering all the parables. Jesus was beside the sea in Capernaum, right? And I showed the picture of where they call, like, Parable Cove and all of that. And so, you know, going off of Luke's narrative of it, Jesus returned. He had to return to someplace. This is base of operations. He's back in Capernaum. Another thing that we actually get from Luke here is it says the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. So, you know, what I find kind of, you know, really interesting here, and we don't get this, and, you know, this is just kind of my own speculation from the text, is that we know when Jesus left Capernaum last time to head to Gerasenes, we know from Mark's telling, and this is only from Mark's telling, that there were other boats with Jesus in the midst of this storm, right? But we don't find out what happened to these boats, right? I think there's, you know, a chance that some of these people that were in these smaller boats, they turned back and they went to Capernaum after the storm was calmed, right? You know, they probably had, you know, they didn't witness the same thing that the disciples had at that point, but they probably knew that something weird had gone on. You got this fierce storm that's threatening to, you know, tear their little boats apart, if it's going to tear Jesus's boat apart, and then all of a sudden it's gone. It's gone. And they're probably, you know, hightailing it back to Capernaum, saying, you know, I was following Jesus, but something crazy happened. You know, this guy might be controlling the weather right now, right? We don't know that for sure. You know, this is just kind of me, you know, looking at it and saying, you know, this was happened. But, you know, either way, we do know from Luke that there were people that were eagerly anticipating his return. They knew he was going to come back, right? And so they're waiting there for him. They probably saw the boat, coming across the horizon, and they're all, gathering up everybody they can. Jesus is on his way back. Jesus is on his way back. And they're waiting for him basically on the shore as he gets out of the boat. So kind of what we talked about, that Jesus is fame, at this point, it's just constantly growing.
Right. And even Jairus was waiting for him as well.
Yeah.
Think about this. He had an agenda.
Yeah.
He met Jesus because he had something specific to tell him. And I have to believe that Jairus was not the only ruler that was starting to believe that this man was real.
Yeah. So, well, that's the next question. Who is Jairus? Who is Jairus? Like, who is this guy?
Right. They don't really identify a lot of these except for Nicodemus.
Right.
They do. I'm sorry, they do name some of them, but I've not heard this name.
Right. And so we actually don't hear this. We don't hear this again. And so, some of the commentaries I read, there's speculation that because of this, Jairus became a follower. And he was well known through the early church. And this is one of the reasons why his name was mentioned, because again, for most of these miracles, most of these people that are mentioned, they're nameless. They don't have a name. Right. So what is the purpose of him being given a name? What is it? Right. And I think that makes sense to me that for the early church, this would have been somebody that they would have known. They would have known of him. Right. He was probably active in the early church because of what happened. I mean, would have been, almost impossible for him to not know who Jesus was after all of this. And so this was kind of, we see these like little breadcrumbs throughout the Gospels and throughout, especially like the Pauline epistles, where the scripture tells us, and I was talking to Jenny about this the other day, as pastors and teachers and other Christians, we have no individual authority, right? And the Bible tells you to test the authority of anybody that is speaking, right? And so we are seeing that through, these early letters and gospels throughout the New Testament of, don't believe me. You don't have to listen to me, right? Go talk to Jairus. Go ask him what happened to his daughter. Because Paul does the same thing. It's like, you know what? You might think I'm crazy. I'm a nobody. I might just be a liar. There's 500 people that saw the resurrected Jesus. Go ask them, because some of them are still alive. You ask them if they saw Jesus, right? And that's, there's all of these things that we start seeing of, there was probably a lot of skepticism, right? A lot of the stuff is sounds really far-fetched and nuts, especially, not just to us, but to a first century Jew as well. All the stuff that's happening doesn't make any sense, right? So these people are saying, you might think I'm a liar. That doesn't matter to me. Go ask all of these people. Ask them what happened, because they're going to tell you the exact same thing that I saw, right? And this is, one of the reasons why Christianity grew so fast, why it exploded, is because there was eyewitnesses to everything that happened. This goes into the whole historicity of the resurrection, because we have, these eyewitness accounts that people could go to, and there was, just don't go look at it, just take my word for it. All of these guys were saying, I'm nobody. Go ask everybody else, and you will see that this was true.
About, Matt, that this man, they identify him as a ruler.
Yeah,
that's a unique word to even say in context.
It is, and it's
one of the rulers of the synagogue.
Right.
So we know that he had a lot of influence.
He has a massive amount of influence, and that's kind of what we're going to get into next. But go ahead.
Well, and he actually steps out in front of everyone as a ruler to ask Jesus for help in front of everyone. That's a huge risk today.
Yeah. This is what Jairus is doing here is really, really significant. Because, like you mentioned, so we have, we get this kind of vague description of him. He's one of the rulers of the synagogue, right? And so a ruler of a synagogue is basically a lay leader, an elder, a group of elected elders, which is anywhere between like 3 and 7 people of this synagogue. So this is the governing body of the synagogue, right? He's not a rabbi, he's not a Pharisee or a scribe or a Sadducee or anything like that, but this guy is very devout and very active and very powerful in the synagogue, right? And so, the plural of the word here is, it signifies that he is not the head of the synagogue, but he is an elder. So he has a very important position of authority inside of this community. And so that could be another reason why, why Jairus was mentioned is by name, is because people, could have gone to Capernaum and said, hey, I'm hearing this thing in this, this letter that was written about something that happened with you. It's like, is this you? Right? Because they would have known. It's like, wait, I know Jairus. Yeah, like he's been at the head, like he's been an elder for a long time. This guy was well known.
And not to mention the fact that word of mouth was even more important than the written word. That spread like wildfire.
Yeah.
And also what's significant is the ruler fell at Jesus' feet.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say that too.
Yep. He's given up his authority.
Yeah.
To Jesus.
Yeah.
He's not just asking for help. He is begging. He has
Right.
humbled himself as far as he can humble himself.
That's right. Right. You can't do any more than that, than laying yourself at someone's feet.
Because he knew that he was at the feet of somebody that had more authority than him.
Absolutely.
He, like at this point, nobody really knows who Jesus is, right? There's nobody that fully is grasping who he is. But remember all the things that have been happening in Capernaum, right? We talked about Capernaum as being his home base, right? Jesus' home base. He does more miracles here than he does any place else. His first major confrontations, his coming out party of Jesus is in his ministry in Galilee, is at the synagogue that Jairus is most likely at, right? Mm-hmm. Jairus was probably there when the demon called out and confessed that Jesus was son of the Most High.
Yeah.
Right? He was probably there. He was probably there or had heard about Jesus forgiving sins and having a paralytic stand up and walk.
And now we take a twist in a couple ways. We see that the people, so we have all these large groups of people. Then we have the groups of the Pharisees and the Sadducees that are now critical of Jesus, challenging Jesus, making him seem like he's nothing, right? In front of everyone. Now we have a turn. We see somebody of significance there who's now in submission to him, at great peril to himself.
Yeah.
So, right?
Well, because compare this to Nicodemus. Nicodemus basically snuck in the middle of the night because he couldn't be seen with Jesus. Right. He believed in Jesus, right? But he didn't have the courage to stand in front of everybody. Jairus doesn't care. His daughter is dying.
Yep.
Right, and we're like this is not just a sniffle. Dying. She is. When he left, it was known in his head that she was dead.
Right.
That there was nothing to do.
That's a point of change in this rule, is because there's no other option. So now you're in a position where you really need Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. And you either have to cross that line. I'm going to believe that this guy is who he says he is.
Yeah.
Or I'm doomed because now it's somebody I deeply care about. I'm going to lose that person.
Yeah.
And step over that line.
And it shows his faith, right? He's like, the consequences don't matter. None of it matters.
Oh, right. Good point.
He put all of his faith in Jesus because he knew he was throwing away everything at this point. Everything that he had built up was going to be thrown away.
Yeah,
he didn't
there's a lot
care.
to pay for that.
Yeah,
there was a lot to pay for that act. But when we do the same for our loved one, right?
Yeah,
throw everything out for that.
Yep.
Right, and some of these people, don't let us kid ourselves. Some of these believers, I'm sure some of these people that sided and tormented Jesus, not verbally, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That probably thought, man, I got to do something, like being in a corporation. If you don't follow what they do, it's wrong, but you still do it.
Yeah.
I feel that same, I'm sure there was many people that felt that Jesus was real, but just didn't have the courage to speak out.
Yeah, that's societal pressure, right? You have these very powerful people telling you essentially what to think, right? That's what the Pharisees and
absolutely.
scribes
They
and
relied on
Sadducees
them,
were doing. This is
right.
how you think. And all of these people in authority are saying this is not the Messiah. He's just a demon. He's got all this stuff. Like, nothing he's doing or saying is true. And a lot of people are like, I don't really believe them, but I'm not willing to put it out there on the line for that. I don't have enough faith to cross that line. Jairus was probably in that boat too, more than likely. Seeing all this stuff, Jesus was doing what he was doing. Faith was working through him, but he wasn't able to take that final step until he got to a moment of desperation. Said, "No, nothing else matters.
Right.
I
Well,
don't care. Let the consequences come."
Isn't that very telling as people now?
Yeah.
God took us up off the ground
Yep.
when we're desperate for him.
Yep.
And that's how that's the beginning of, and a lot of the people that came to him, not everyone, but we have the centurion.
Yep.
Who came to Jesus too in desperation.
Yep.
Right. That's very prophetic too, because you talk to somebody who comes to Christ, it's usually, including myself, at a very low time in our lives.
Yep. Yep. And I think it is. I don't think we see it a lot. It's a criticism that's made against Christianity, right? That Christianity is basically there and it's exploiting people at their lowest moments, because that is typically when people come to God, is at their lowest moments. And I don't think that's something that we should reject, that it's an exploitation, but we shouldn't reject that that is exactly what happens, because God understands that we have to be humbled to come to him, that we're not ready to receive him until we're humbled. And Jairus, he can't get more humbled. Like you both have pointed out, he is falling down on his knees, right? He has humbled himself in front of Jesus. Consequences be damned. None of it matters. I know you can do this. I've seen what you've done. Save my daughter. Please, I'm begging you.
That's what is in essence, in one sentence, that's exactly what he was saying.
Yep. Yep.
I'm submitting to you. I believe in you. I have faith that you can heal my child. And you're the only one that can do that.
Yep. Yep. And so, yeah, it's a moment of desperation that he came to God, but that's what he needed. It's what he needed to be able to get there. Because if you look at, the whole aspect of predestination and, the sovereignty of God, that he can make anything happen, he can allow anything to happen, that is in total and full control. Maybe his daughter needed to get sick. Maybe that was the only way that Jairus was going to come to God.
There's so much that's not even told. He just simply says he went with her.
Yep.
He doesn't say what he did when he got there with her, but we know that didn't even need to be said.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And there was a huge shift in this whole experience for probably the movement, because now we're getting people that are in positions of authority that people will listen to.
Yep.
Backing Jesus Christ as a Messiah.
Yep. So, all right, I want to move on, because now we're getting into the crowd. We're building up this scene here. We're gonna have to come back to him, next week, but kind of keep everything that we've talked about in your mind, best as we can, because he's gonna play a big part in the story next week. Moving on to 24, right? So Jesus is going with Jairus. They're heading back to Jairus's house right now, and it says a great crowd followed him and thronged him. Right? Thronged is a weird word. It's not something that we generally use in modern English, but it's giving the sense that the multitude is crowding. So the Greek word basically means to press together. So almost like an olive press is kind of the imagery that's happening here. Is this crowd is so thick and so dense, right? That Jesus, this is they're probably going just down the street, not very far, but Jesus is probably having to fight through this crowd. Everyone is touching him, This is super important to what happens next, right? That everyone is touching everybody else. You can't tell one person from the next at this point. So why is the multitude thronging Jesus? Why are they so close to him? Why are they so tight up on him right now?
Well,
Oh, they want a piece of the action. You know, he's like the rock star, right?
Yeah, Jenny.
well, I think twofold. One, they've just seen this person, Jairus, humble himself, and they probably don't see that happen very often
Yeah.
with people they consider authorities. But also, when Jesus was there last, he was doing all this cool stuff, and he had all this cool stuff to say. Is so they don't want to miss anything. Like, they know he's going with Jairus to go do something with his daughter, but like, what if he stops along the way and, heals somebody's arm, or
Yeah.
they want to see it all. And I have this picture when you said throng of, like, it's basically not even separate humans anymore. It's its
Yeah.
own beast, just like
Like a swarm of bees.
It's
all
like-
together. Yeah.
In my mind, probably I'm the only person that's ever been in a really violent mosh pit, but like that's my agreement, like, or my understanding of this is this, like, you can't move, like you're having to like fight through just to get an inch, right? And I think that's kind of what we're getting right here in Capernaum. It's just like how close and tight everybody is, because they're curious about what's going to happen next. They might not understand it. Jenny said that all that stuff was happening before, right? They want to see what he can do. And there's also this sense too that there was a belief around this time that being among and touching a great person could just give you some of their greatness, that it could kind of rub off on you, essentially. There's talks that when Alexander the Great would go into one of the cities, that people would just come up to him just to try to touch him, just to try to see him, because they knew that Alexander the Great was great. That's how he got the name, and they wanted a little bit of that too. And so they're looking at Jesus like that, in the kind of the same way. We don't know exactly who he is, but this guy's doing miracles and he seems pretty great. I want some of that for myself. I think the vast majority of the people that are here are not the elect. They're not. They're looking for what Jesus can do for them in the here and now, and that's all they care about.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care about anything else. It's not really a faith in Jesus at this point. It's Jesus as a method for me to get something that I want. And it is generally a very shallow thing. Right, for a lot of these people, I think do have a lot of people that are coming in sickness that are looking for healing, but a lot that not the entire city isn't sick. But I think most of the people there at this point, they might appreciate the things that Jesus is saying, but they're not truly listening. They're not truly grasping what he's saying, and they're just there because they want a piece of that greatness themselves too. Not to glorify God, but to glorify themselves.
Right.
So, I think this is kind of important, and especially as we're getting into the next section, is to understand all of this and kind of the situation that we're in. Putting yourself in the bird's eye view, or even like on the ground level of what's happening now, and understanding the different diversity of people and their thoughts that's going through. It's not to say that nobody in there came to Christ, but the majority didn't. We know that the road is narrow.
Yeah, but see, that's how the word is spread, though, right?
Right.
Is wow. I was there. This guy was doing stuff I've never seen before. We do that with anybody, or say anything about anything that's new and different. We pique an interest in it, and some people will follow whatever it is, whether it be investing in a stock. I got a stock tip for you, or whatever. But that was not a bad thing to have happen, believer or not believer.
No. So yeah, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is important to understand that not everybody in that crowd was saved.
Yeah, I think we'd be foolish to think that that many people, and they use the word in 21, great crowd.
Yeah.
Now, what would identify a great crowd? For me, I think hundreds, if not thousands.
Yeah. It's most likely thousands, and
Yeah.
you know, the
Can you
multitude.
imagine?
Yeah.
Can you even imagine that scene?
Especially in, you know, in that time when population is not anything like it was to, you know, today. You know,
Right.
you're talking
Narrow
about, you know,
streets.
less than a
Right.
billion people in the entire world probably at that time. Having 1,000 people pressing in like this, you know, this is a sight. This is not a normal occurrence.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Okay, so this part, I'm gonna not try to, like, you know, go through it super fast, but it is an important thing to focus on because there are seemingly inconsistencies between the synoptic gospels, and you know, I talked about this. You know, Jenny's smiling over there, you know, but I'm trying not to be long-winded off this, but it is important because if you read all three accounts, they don't seem to line up. There's something that's weird about it, right? So in Matthew's telling of the story, when Jairus comes to Jesus, the daughter's already dead. Also in Matthew's telling, the event happens right after Jesus finishes the parables by the sea. Matthew's telling is actually really abbreviated. It's 135 words compared to Mark's 374. Now compare Mark and Luke, and both of them make the point that the girl is at the point of death, but not yet dead. Matthew doesn't include the interruption later on in the story. You know, people coming to Jairus to tell him that daughter is already dead. There's some pretty glaring inconsistencies. Mark and Luke kind of match up pretty well, but Matthew doesn't. So I found two commentaries that really talk about this, and I'll read both of them. But these aren't as glaring inconsistencies as they seem at a first glance. So as consistently throughout his gospel, especially with miracle stories, Matthew abbreviates Mark, this time to such an extent that he seems to contradict the parallel accounts. Instead of coming to plead with Jesus while his daughter is alive, Jairus apparently arrives only after her death. Yet to call this a contradiction is I don't know how to pronounce that word, to be honest. To oppose on an ancient text modern standards of precision in storytelling. What is more, in a world without modern medical monitors to establish the precise moment of expiry, there is not nearly so much difference between Matthew's telling of it and Mark's. What is important is not the precise moment of death, but Jairus' astonishing faith. So the important part here is that Matthew is contracting the story. And another take that I saw on this that I think is really that I think kind of explains a lot of things is that in Matthew's contracted telling of the story, he's saying what the father is already thinking. When the father got to Jairus, his words might have been, my daughter is dead, but what he was really thinking, my daughter's dead. It's over. It's too late. Because he does say these words to Jesus later. He does say, my daughter's dead, just lay your hands on her and I know that you can do it and make her live. So Matthew's contracting this down because to him, those details they don't seem to matter to him, right? And again, this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, is that each of these stories, the telling of these stories is from a very different perspective. What was important to Mark wasn't important to Matthew. What was important to Matthew there wasn't important to Mark. It was the same story, but told from a different perspective, and that's kind of what we're really getting here. And I think this has been an issue in the church for a long time, because St. Augustine wrote about it in the 5th century. So some of these early church fathers have struggled with how to reconcile all three tellings of the story. And what Augustine says is, it becomes necessary for us, therefore, to investigate this fact, lest it may seem to exhibit any contradiction between the accounts. And I think that's really important in what he's saying right there, right? Is that there's a seemingly obvious contradiction. We're not going to ignore this. We're going to figure it out. We're not going to let this stand and just say, well, the word is obviously errant. Right? That's not what we should do as Christians. If there is something that doesn't seem right, it doesn't make sense to us, we are to dig. We are to seek it out and understand it, because we go into it knowing the word is inerrant, that it's not a lie. It's not made up. There's a reason behind why this is different, and this is what Augustine is saying here. He says, and the way to explain it is to suppose that by reason of brevity in the narrative, Matthew has preferred to express it as if the Lord had been really asked to do what it is clear he did not do, what is clear he did actually do, namely raise the dead to life. For what Matthew directs our attention to is not the mere words spoken by the Father about his daughter, but what is of more importance, his mind and purpose. Thus he has given words calculated to represent the Father's real thoughts. For he had so thoroughly despaired of his child's case that, not believing that she whom he had just left dying could possibly now be found yet in life, his thought rather was that she might be made alive again. Accordingly, two of the evangelists have introduced the words which were literally spoken by Jairus, but Matthew has exhibited rather what the man secretly wished and thought. Thus both petitions were really addressed to the Lord, namely either that he should restore the dying damsel, or that if she was already dead, he might raise her to life again. But as it was Matthew's object to tell the whole story in short compass, he has represented the Father as directly expressing it in his request what, it is certain, had been his own real wish and what Christ actually did. So, kind of the long-winded version of what I was saying is that Matthew's contracting this down and he's expressing what the Father was actually feeling, not just what he said. Mark and Luke are going into the actual words of it. We get a little bit more drama here. Matthew's kind of short and to the point on this. I think if we had the autism spectrum, back in the day, Matthew might have been on the spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
He might have been there. You just kind of see that in some of his writings. He doesn't really always seem to go into emotions. Like, he might not fully understand the emotions, and he's very matter of the fact. And this is kind of what might be happening here is, Mark and Luke are understanding the story from a very emotional point of view, where Matthew's like, this man had faith. He came to Christ. Nothing else really matters. He's just telling the story from a very direct point of view off of it, where Mark and Luke are seeing the emotional aspects of it and portraying that in their narrative.
Yeah, very objective point of view. Yeah.
So,
very simplistic, but objective. Yeah.
So that's all I wanted to say on that. But like I said, it is important, that when there is a contradiction or a seeming contradiction, we don't just walk away from it and say, I don't know how to explain this. We're told to look. We're told to seek and figure this out, because we're at every opportunity we have to defend our faith.
Yeah, and actually too, it gives us a deeper understanding of the differences in like you said, the style of the writing itself.
Yeah. Okay. So you see why we split this up into two sessions, because we still got a little bit to go here. Okay. So starting back up, we're going to cover 25 to 28 right now. And so I'll read this again so we have this, fresh in our head. It says, there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garment, I will be made well. So, we're again, moving past Jairus right now. They're in the midst of this crowd that's pressing in from all sides, right? And we're this opening part of it here, right? She had suffered many things from many physicians. What's the significance of this? That this is kind of our first real description of this woman is telling you all these things that she's gone through.
Well, part of the suffering was that, the physicians, I'm sure, made it difficult to even allow her to ask for help, because discharge of blood made you unclean. And so you weren't supposed to be around a woman when she was discharging. So if she's been, like this for 12 years, what help she could get from the physicians was always from afar. So it was probably something she had to self-inflict.
Yeah.
Plus the superstition of it too. that with women with the uncleanliness associated with the bleeding.
Well, it's not actually superstition, isn't it? Isn't it?
Well, it was
isn't
part
the-
of the law, right?
It
Yeah.
was the
Yeah.
law that
Yeah,
if
it
you
was
were
part of the
you were
law for
bleeding,
We'll
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit. But yeah, we're gonna dive into this because it is, you know, it's not something that we can skip over just because, you know, it can be an uncomfortable conversation. There's something that's very important about this woman's condition and her state in life because of it.
I was just gonna say that those three lines were so incredibly profound that after suffering
Yeah.
for a long time, she finally comes to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So us as humans have great suffering in our life, but when we're made new again, when we come to Jesus.
Yeah. And we kind of, you know, covered a little bit with the doctors, and this isn't in the notes because I just learned about it. The Talmud was not very nice to doctors. They looked at doctors as crooks that had no idea what they were doing, and they did more harm than good. And the prescribed treatment for this woman would have been to carry around the ashes of an ostrich egg. That was what they would have prescribed her. Take an ostrich egg, turn it into ash, and walk around with it, you know, in a different type of bag, you know, if it's the summer or the winter. So this is what they're asking her, and they're charging her a lot of money to do this, right? We kind of get that sense too that she has lost everything.
and it probably cost her a lot of money to do it.
Yeah, no, it's she's broke. She is dead broke.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the big significance of this here is, I skipped down a little bit. Worldly healing completely failed the woman. The world could offer her nothing else. She's desperate. She's got nothing else to live for. Everyone she turned to before Jesus only took more from her, and instead of helping her, it left her worse off than before. So this verse right here really highlights that Jesus was her only hope, right? And so compare this to the last section we were at, right? These people are very similar right now. They're very similar. We're going to start diving into, you know, the state of this mind. We already covered this with Jairus. Now we're going to cover the state of this woman's mind and where she was at, and to see how hopeless and desperate that she was, right? So, you know, the next question here is, you know, why did the woman come to Jesus when she heard of him? We kind of get a little bit of it in the text, but again, remember all that we've been talking about with Jesus in Capernaum. So why did she come to him?
What desperation, Matt. What desperation for this woman.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? That desperation to know that this to her was her last hope, I would think, to some degree, right?
Yeah.
I got this one shot. I got a shot.
Yeah. Because she and that's, you know, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, and she would have heard of, you know, we talked about with the paralytic, like the paralytic basically had no life.
Yeah.
And she's in a similar situation. If she heard of something, and this wasn't just something like Jesus put a Band-Aid on the paralytic, like the man could walk.
Yeah.
Like, so she obviously recognizes she has something that, again, makes her kind of an outcast, a second in society.
Yep.
And if he's done that already, what more could he do?
Yeah.
And she's looking at it as, you know, at least I read the, you know, if I touch even his garments, I'll be made well. Some of it may seem like she's kind of saying that in desperation or in superstition, kind of that, like, you know, touching of somebody and you just get things, but also I don't feel like I can even ask for that because this would be such a major gift that I just want to try it myself. I just want to be in his presence and earn it, I guess.
How powerful was he that even if I touch the clothes he wears.
Yeah.
And we're gonna dive into that because it is there's a little thing that Mark doesn't mention that we do get in Matthew and Luke, because it is for different audiences, that completely changes what this woman was doing. We're gonna cover that there. But remember, way back to Mark 1, right, where he healed a leper who was in a similar situation to her. He is unclean. He's cast out from society, and Jesus touches the leper, right? He touches the leper, makes him clean, and then we get him in Mark 1:45. It says, but he, this is after Jesus told him not to tell anybody. He's like, I can't keep it in. I got to tell everybody. He went out and began to talk freely about it and to spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every quarter, right? Mm-hmm. So the word had spread. This is probably one of the stories that she had heard, because it's not clear where she came from. We don't quite know. She could have been in Capernaum. She could have been a complete outcast from society. She could have been from an outside village. We don't know, but all we do know is that stories have reached her, and what we're told in verse 27. And so she says, I've got to. Nothing else has worked, but I know that he can do this. So, I look at this, we can compare this to the demoniac really in the chapter 2, because, Mark 5:3-4, it says he lived among the tombs and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains. And we talked about this, right? That the world had tried, society had tried to help this demoniac, and they couldn't do anything. And so rather than continue to try, they cast him out completely from society. This is exactly where this woman is too. We see now Jesus is going to these desperate people, but really they're coming to him. The Father is drawing these people close to Christ right now. They're at their lowest points of their life, and they are finding Christ. They are finding him. And I think it was it might have been R.C. Sproul that was talking about this in one of the sermons that I watched on regarding this. But the gospel is been preached at this point. We're kind of like, where we are in the story, enough of it has been preached for salvation to be accessible. Because look at the demoniac. He spent a couple hours with Jesus, and Jesus sent him out and said, spread the gospel. Go out and tell the good news, right? So Jesus has given him everything that he needs. Salvation is accessible at this point. And so now what we're seeing is Jesus's work. It's not done. It's not complete yet, but the Father is now drawing in the elect to him. They are coming to him right now. And this is what we're seeing, with the demoniac, with Jairus, with this bleeding woman. They are seeking Jesus out because they don't fully understand it, but they know enough that Jesus is their Savior, that Jesus is the only one that can actually save them from all that they're facing. So, the same thing is happening here between the demoniac and the bleeding woman. And so, now we're kind of getting into, this part of the narrative here where she's sneaking up on him, right? So she's approaching Jesus from behind, and she's only wants to touch his garment. Why isn't she going face to face? Why isn't she acting like Jairus, right? Why isn't she going up and saying, Jesus, heal me? What's happening here?
Well, the stigma of her infirmity in itself.
Yep.
That she didn't even feel she had the right to. She was just going to get a little touch and hope for the best. She didn't have the right to touch him. She felt she didn't have the right to touch him.
Yeah.
I'm sure also somewhere in the back of her mind was also like, if I approach him and ask him, everyone's going to get upset with me because I've made them unclean.
Yeah.
Being in contact with somebody who's
Yep.
unclean is,
Good point.
if I fly under the radar, I don't know what the dog just did, but it sounded like she fell. If I kind of fly under the radar and just get my touch, then
Yep.
I don't have to admit to anyone.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be responsible for making this whole crowd unclean, because
Yeah.
really that's basically what
Right. Right.
That's exactly what happened when again. That's why it's important of this description of the crowd, of how close they are together. She's having to force her way through just like Jesus. she is making everyone that she touches ceremonially unclean at this point. And this is where we're kind of, going to dive into this woman's specific condition. We don't know exactly what it is, but, like we said, blood makes a person unclean and untouchable, especially menstrual blood. And so Leviticus 15, 19 through 33 has, the full layout of it, of, this is what has to happen when a woman is going through that time of the month. She has to be separated out from society. And this isn't necessarily a superstitious thing. It is the God had shown the Israelites that blood was a life force, and that blood could also cause disease and illness. This is before, pathology and anything like that. And so they were very careful about blood. This is direction that God had given his people to keep them safe. And so this is what's happening here in Leviticus, is that this is, she's bleeding, there's blood, she has to be out from society. And this is Leviticus 15, 25 through 27. It says, if a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her menstrual impurity, which is what this woman is going through right now, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her impurity, all the days of the discharge she shall continue in uncleanliness. As in the days of her impurity, she shall be unclean. Every bed on which she lies, all the days of her discharge shall be to her as the bed of her impurity, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean, as in the uncleanliness of her menstrual impurity. And whoever touches these things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. So this is something that they would have all inherently understood. This woman was probably, might have been well known, right? We don't know exactly what her disorder is, but again, it's likely some sort of menstrual disorder, and this is probably something that had been happening to her since she was, at that age. So she might be like 24, 25 years old, and this has been something that she's been suffering with her entire life. Right? This has caused her, to be an outcast from society her entire life. So she's suffering from this. She's embarrassed by it. She's ashamed by it. She's being outcast from society. So, it's kind of what we've already pointed out. So rather than face Jesus in the potential humiliation, she approached him from behind, hoping just to simply be healed without any attention being put on her. Too bad Marie's not here, because, one could easily imagine, one of the disciples, Peter, seeing the woman, knowing about her disorder, and attempting to stop from getting close to Jesus. Imagine how embarrassing that would be for her, right? Somebody's going to recognize me. All I'm trying to do is just get close to Jesus and heal me. It's my only shot. And if somebody recognized me, they would stop me, and they might kill me. This was a real issue, a concern for her, for what she had just done. This woman is incredibly bold by getting herself into this crowd. So she felt that her only way to approach Jesus was in shame. It was the only way that she could do it. But what's another thing that we're noticing here? There's a humbleness. The same thing with Jairus. There's a humbleness about her. She's recognizing where she is. Right? She's recognizing, how society has seen her. And also, one of the things that we have to look at here too is that blood is also symbolic for sin. So she's constantly being reminded of her own sinful nature. This bleeding will not stop. She's unclean. She is an outcast from society. She cannot be in the synagogue. She cannot get close to God. She probably isn't even married. Because if this has been happening her entire life, no man would touch her, because he couldn't. It would mean he got cast out from society too. They weren't living in a type of society that would make concessions like that. Today, probably a little bit different, but back then, they're going to look at her and say, cool and all, but I can't put that upon myself. I'm not going to do that. And so, again, we don't know her exact age on this, but we do know she was suffering for this for 12 years. So this is not, a new thing. This has been probably the bulk of her life that she's been outcast like this. And, we're kind of going to get into this a little bit next week with Jairus' daughter. We don't find out where we are right now in Mark, how old she is, but she's 12 years old too. So there's a parallel here between the years, but 12 is a really important age. And that's the age that a woman becomes eligible for marriage. So for a 12-year-old girl, her life is ahead of her right there. This is what she's been waiting for. She's about to have her own family. She's about to have everything that's been promised to her, that she's been looking forward to. And in the case with the bleeding woman, if this started from the time that she was 12 or around that age, her life was ripped from her. And then you have the little girl dying. Her life is literally being ripped from her. She is about to receive all the things that a little girl wants, and it's all being taken away from her at this point. So there's a lot of parallels that's happening here in these stories. Not just the whole uncleanliness, but the big point of this is that the woman is absolutely desperate to do what she did. Absolutely desperate. This is a wretched soul. It just I don't think any of us today can fully even understand what she was going through. It's so difficult for us to put ourselves into her shoes and understand all of the things that she was feeling. You can't even have a friend. You can't be around these people because all they're going to see is your uncleanliness, and they're going to shun you away because they don't want that spreading to them. I don't know how she got through this. I don't know how she managed to do this, for this period of time, especially knowing that she tried everything. She's dead broke at this point. And the only thing that's happened in all this time, she's got no money, and now it's worse. It's awful. It's awful what she's going through right now. So that puts you in the state of where she is as she's coming to Christ. So now we get into this details about the garments, where it says even if I touch even his garments. Like I said, Luke and Matthew add a really important detail that gets missed here in Mark. Now, why wouldn't this be in Mark? Anyone want to take a guess?
No.
You're muted, Diane.
Yeah, say that again, Matt.
So there's a very important detail here that's left out. Maybe I should tell the detail in this question, might be a little bit better, easier to answer.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
I'm not
Okay.
sure what I was looking for.
So the
but,
additional detail is that she touched the fringe of his garment.
Right.
Why is that detail important?
She didn't
fringe
take a
was
fistful. She just
No.
clearly caught his tail.
She did. The Greek word is actually clasp. She's grasping and clasping onto it. It's out of Numbers. Numbers 15, 37 through 40. The Lord says to Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. And it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. So you shall remember and do all my commandments and be holy to your God."
All right.
Every devout Jew would have these bluish tassels on the fringes of their garments as a remembrance of God. That is what she's grasping for. She's grasping for God. She knows this. She is a Jew. She knows this. She is going to the tassels. And, again, the word that's being used here in Greek is that she is grasping onto it. She's holding on for dear life to this. What is she? She's not just seeking Jesus. She is seeking God. That is why she's touching his tassels. And so I'll ask this again. So why wouldn't Mark have this in there?
Because
Yeah, she would have had to. You're right. She would have had to bend down to the ground to touch his tassels. That wasn't a random act. She was just reaching for something. That was intentional.
Yeah, this is an intentional grasping for God.
Well, yeah, because they were on the ground.
Yeah,
She's not crawling to him.
she's she's seeking God.
Right.
She understands
I get that,
yeah.
but I'm just saying that is so that act itself, when you're trying to process it, she could have touched his shoulder. She could have touched his waist. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But she chose to touch that symbolic,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty cool.
I still don't. I have no idea why Mark wouldn't have included that.
Mark wasn't writing for Jews.
Oh.
Mark was writing
but-
for a Gentile audience.
Oh, because Peter was supposed to be doing that for the Gentiles.
No, remember this was we talked about this. This was for the Romans. This was for the Roman Christians that wanted to hear more of Peter's gospel and his testimony. Mark was the one that was writing this, but they really weren't. They were Gentiles. They might have
So
had a
you're saying-
little bit of
So they
understanding.
wouldn't have known.
They wouldn't have
Right, they
understood
wouldn't
it.
have understood it.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
would. Yeah, they wouldn't have got it at all. That's why Matthew puts it in there, because Matthew is specifically for Jews,
Okay.
and Luke is
got it.
more kind of acting as a historian, so he's going to add in these additional details. So Mark's going to leave that out because it's not. They wouldn't get it. They
Right.
wouldn't understand. Well, what fringe, whatever. That doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
us Gentiles didn't get it.
Yeah.
All
So
those years later.
Jesus is recognizing what this action actually means, and when he tells her later in 5:34, he says that her faith has made her well, it's because she was doing this deliberate act of seeking out God. That is where her faith was. That was the object of her faith, and we're going to talk about that in the next section here. So again, notice now we're starting to dive into faith, right? So notice this what she says, right? And this is internal monologue that's happening right now to her. We get later on that she tells her whole story, and so this is how we're getting what she was going through and what she was thinking. There is definite, confident language, right? If I touch his garments, I will be made well. She definitively knew that Jesus had the ability to heal her and that Jesus could make her clean. So with absolute certainty and pure faith, she approached Jesus. So, again, we already talked about, but think about how bold this woman had to be to do this. She likely wasn't allowed in public for fear of making others unclean, but she joins this thronging crowd, touching others in the process, and then boldly touching Jesus. This would have made Jesus ceremonially unclean from an outside perspective. But Jesus, being the tabernacle, could not be made unclean, but would rather make holy and clean all that touched him. This is Exodus 29:37. 7 days you shall make atonement for the altar and consecrate it, and the altar shall be most holy. Whatever touches the altar shall become holy. So in that moment, when she touched Jesus, didn't make Jesus unclean. She became clean. She became holy as a result of it. So there's a commentary here that I want to read, and it says, Mark makes no judgment on her orthodoxy or lack thereof, however. Rather, he relates that she does the one and only important thing for a disciple to do. She heard, she came, she touched. To act on what one hears about Jesus is always in Mark the sign of a disciple, and this woman does. She's acting as a disciple. She heard about Jesus, she acted in faith, and she came to him in faith, and then touched him in faith. Everything she did was done in faith, but it wasn't faith that was the object of her faith. It was Jesus. It was God that was the object of her faith. She believed that Jesus came from God. She believed, might not have fully understood who Jesus was at this point, but she had faith that Jesus was acting on the authority of God and that God could heal her, that no one else could. Everyone had tried, but God could heal her, and that's why she came to Jesus. Okay, so we got Diane here. It's her favorite word coming up in verse 29. It says, and immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. So what's the significance of immediately here?
I'm sorry, say that again.
What's the significance of immediately?
Immediately.
In
Yeah.
verse 29.
Verse 29, yeah.
There was the faith act response was not delayed. It was immediate.
Yeah, no, it was
I kept
immediately,
finding
yeah.
something with the same
No,
word.
it's you could
It
use the
was
same
finished.
word, yeah. It's done. Yeah, it's this is immediately as touching as she touched that tassel, right? That she did this act of faith. It was done. It was healed. It was over. So, this commentary says this: a man, as in the story of the man with a shriveled hand in chapters 3, verse 1 through 6, in bringing her infirmity to Jesus, she is healed. 12 years of shame and frustration are resolved in a momentary touch of Jesus. Everything she had gone through is done in a moment, instantaneously gone and healed.
In the sentence before, Matthew, were you saying something, Denise?
I was just saying she was made whole.
Yep.
Well, and in the sentence before, she doesn't say I may. She said I will.
I will.
Will.
Yeah. That definite language.
I will
Yep.
be made well. So there's a belief in faith, and Jesus illustrates it with the disciples that couldn't exorcise a demon.
Yeah.
And he said, when are you going to start having some faith here?
Yep.
You can do this.
Yep. Okay. So now we get to this next part. She felt in her body that she was healed. So what does that mean? Think about that, right? She felt in her body.
Just it knowing, you know what you know what you know.
Yeah.
As
12
Maria would
years.
say.
12 years of that cloud over her head, right? Of and think of the iron deficiencies, that was coming from this, right? Like inside of her, like she knew immediately she had been healed. Everything had changed for her in that instance. The Greek word that's used for felt in her body, it's translated from a word that basically means an experiential understanding.
Yeah.
She knew that. She knew what she felt like before all this happened, and she knew how she felt now, and said, "I feel like I'm 12 years old again before all these issues. I am whole."
Not to mention the fact of spiritual healing within her
Yep.
too. We all get a change in our bodies when we come to Christ.
Yep.
Right? You can't put your finger on it, but there is a difference in you.
Yep.
That's what it was.
Yeah. She felt it. She felt different.
Yeah,
she
they're
knew
different.
she was different. All right. So going on to 30 and 32 here. So I'll read this again. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?"
So,
And
did you have something to say first? Because
let me finish the verses. And then and his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. So go ahead.
I'm excited. I'm so excited for this scripture. How profound that when we reach out to God in faith, that not only do we feel it, but he does too.
Yeah. He's personal.
Are you kidding me?
He's
So our
personal.
prayers to God. He's feeling that from us.
And what's
You know how profound it is?
what's the greatest miracle of all?
What? Love.
No. What's the greatest miracle of all?
That's the greatest commandment.
Well, no, I know that's the greatest thing ever. That's the greatest thing ever.
I'm sorry.
It was wanted by love.
But it's not love. What's the greatest miracle?
The greatest miracle, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
More than that.
More than that.
Our salvation.
Oh,
Yeah.
Our salvation is the greatest miracle.
man, I
The
gotta
unpassable divide has been bridged.
No, you're right.
And that is the
Yeah.
greatest miracle. And every time one comes to Christ in salvation, he feels that. He
For all the angels
personally
rejoice.
feels that power.
There's a big old party in heaven every time somebody comes
Yep.
to Christ.
And so yeah, this is an amazing verse because this, Christianity is really the only religion out there. The only explanation of all that we have that has a personal, caring God at the center of it.
Mhm.
That everything we do affects him. He feels everything. And immediately he perceived that she had received that.
Right. Yep. It's just that you just know.
And what's really interesting here too is that this is not the same word that was used with her knowing. The word used here is gives a sense of knowing fully. He knew she might have not fully understood what happened, but he did. He understood that this wasn't just a physical healing. She was one of the elect. She had was adopted into the kingdom at that moment.
Is that that's pretty profound to say that he knew that the touching in itself was faith, right?
Yeah.
She had to believe that Jesus was it.
Yeah.
She had to believe that he was something special. Did she actually believe that he was Messiah? I have to believe she probably did, right?
To some extent, yeah. She might have not fully understood it.
Well,
which
if you're saying that she was the elect, you're saying that she did receive that salvation through her faith.
Yeah. Right?
That is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's very interesting because so are you saying that Jesus, even when we come to Christ or people come to Christ, that he feels that physical change?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That's exactly what I'm saying there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything.
Amen.
Everything.
Amen.
Every miracle that he does, including the greatest miracle of all, he feels that power.
That's
he feels
amazing.
that happen.
And you knew it was something special because he really wanted to know who it was.
Yep.
And imagine how many people actually had the people closest to him actually physically were touching him at that moment too.
Yeah. Well, so that's where we're going into this next section. So why did he ask who touched his clothes?
Because he felt the difference. He felt there was something.
He felt the power draining from him.
It's not. I wouldn't say. Drain is not the word.
Not draining.
Yeah. It's. He felt the power going out.
I think that faith is very powerful supernaturally.
Yeah.
Just the faith in our bodies, right, is supernatural.
Yeah.
And God knew that difference between that faith and the other touching for even a believer or non-believer. Right.
Because remember, the scripture says that he healed everyone, but not everyone was saved. This is different. Right. This is different. Right. And so he's asking who touched his clothes because because he wants to have that personal relationship with her at this point.
Oh, amen to that.
That's what he's doing here.
I think it's important to know that when she touched him, when we go to Christ, he gives us peace. And so he said to her, go in peace.
Yeah, we're going to cover that too. We got a couple more verses before we get there. Jumping ahead on. So
it's not the first time he said go in peace. He's used that a lot.
This is actually not super frequent. What this phrase is not actually super frequent.
But there were times in this gospel that he does say it.
He does, but it's not like a common benediction that he gives. Like he gives this very specifically.
It's a very interesting choice of words too.
It is. It's all right. We're jumping ahead. We're jumping ahead. We got. Let me get through this section, and then we'll get there.
This is so exciting. I love these small groups.
So he's wanting that personal relationship, right? He's wanting her to continue her boldness and to come to him at this point, because this is probably a horror show for her right now, right? She snuck up on him, thinking I could just touch him, walk away, I'm healed, it's all good, right? And then he says, "Who touched me?" And she's like, "Oh, damn." and so we get that into the next section. She is trembling. Yeah. Trembling, right? So this commentary by R.T. Francis says, it is this which takes the woman herself by surprise when she finds that what she had planned as a secret one-way contact proves in fact to be two-way and thus brought into the open. And I think that's a really important part to really focus on here, right? This was a two-way interaction that just happened between these two, right? He felt it, and so did she. They knew both of them knew what had happened. She was saved at that moment, in that instant. So, going on to the disciples, why did they respond the way that they did?
because they couldn't figure out why he would know. He goes, everybody, they said everybody was touching you. How did he, they couldn't understand. They didn't understand how he would know that some.
They thought he lost his mind. They're just
Yeah,
like,
again,
you know, it was probably Peter's like, Jesus, everyone is touching you. What do you mean, who touched you? Right? Like, there's 1,000 people around. Everyone is touching you. How can you ask that question? Who's touching you?
It's kind of like, you know, it's almost like they heard him say it in like the, like a little kid's voice, you know, like,
Yeah.
Mom, he's touching me.
Yeah.
Mom, he's touching me. You know, like the little kids in the back seat is like, it's almost like he like, that's probably absolutely not how he said it.
Sounded
Yeah.
so absurd,
But
right?
Yeah.
that's probably what they were like, are you for real right
Yeah.
now? Like,
Are you kidding?
we
You
don't
kidding
even
me?
want to, like, we don't want to be here right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
right. Right.
So there's a really important thing that you know I you know caught in this commentary by John Grasmick, that I think we can kind of, you know, skip over sometimes. I know I did before I really saw that, but like once I read this and I went back and I was like, oh wow, this is you know, dead on. It says this emphasized Jesus' ability to distinguish the touch of one who in faith expected deliverance from the inadvertent touch of those crowding against him. There was and still is a great difference between the two. The sheep know their shepherd.
Yep.
They were called in, and the shepherd knows his sheep. He
Yep.
understood, you know, all these people touching him, everybody around, all these people, you know, that were probably in her, like her, in you know, in the aspect of just wanting to be healed. And he understood there was a difference between those two. And it was her, the saved, the elect, that he focused on right there. So, you know, his disciples are, you know, basically saying, you're nuts. Like, what are you doing? We can't answer this question. But Jesus persisted, right? He persisted, and he's looking around to see who had done it. So why is he persisting?
because he wants to make, this is going to sound negative, but he wants to make an example.
But he
doesn't
kind of,
like,
yeah.
he wants to call attention to what she didn't want to call attention to, but it's not like make an example like to punish her. He wants to like
And he
hey,
wanted-
look at all of you people crowding around me.
Yeah.
Like, she's probably one of the very few who are coming with
Yeah.
a
Right, he
contrite
needed to-
and love it and
Yep.
faithful heart.
And coming into the kingdom is important.
Yep. What?
And he needed to finish that. He needed to finish that interaction.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
it wasn't completed yet.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. It wasn't done yet, and she's still, you know, concerned about everything, right? Like there's probably all these lingering thoughts that are still in her head, right? You know, there wasn't a magic switch that all of the thoughts that she had before are gone, right? Like we know that when we come to Christ, you know, it doesn't mean everything behind us is gone. You know, we still have to deal with it. We still have to reconcile everything that was happening. And she's, you know, this is in seconds afterwards, like her brain is still in overdrive trying to figure out what's going on, and she is probably still a little scared. But what does Paul tell us in Romans about those who are in Christ?
So, you know, I hope I'm not getting off on a tangent when I answer that. I hope I'm on the right track. But she came to him with fear and trembling.
Yeah.
And that's how God always wanted us to always come to him.
Yeah.
Is in fear and trembling.
Yeah. That's not what I was talking about, but that is a good point.
Oh, darn it.
The point I was talking about in Romans is therefore there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. She is not condemned. She is
Oh,
not
amen.
outcast from society. And Christ is saying, stand up. There's nothing to be ashamed of anymore.
That's right. No doubt. And he needed to make a public declaration. He needed to show a public declaration of that.
Yep.
There's no condemnation in what you did because you did it in faith for the right reasons.
Yep.
With humbleness.
Yeah.
And I like this commentary on this too. And this is James Edwards, and he says, she wants a cure, however, a something, whereas Jesus desires a personal encounter with someone. He is not content to dispatch a miracle. He wants to encounter a person. In the kingdom of God, miracle leads to meeting. Discipleship is not simply getting our needs met. It is being in the presence of Jesus, being known by him, and following him. So like you said, Diane, the work wasn't done. The encounter wasn't done. He says, stand up. You no longer need to be ashamed. We're going to finish this encounter in front of everybody, because now, what did he say to her right in the next verse? Daughter.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, last section. We're getting there. All right, this is 33 to 34. It says, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. So, I think we already talked about this a little bit, but, I want to go a little bit deeper into it. Why is the woman so afraid?
Oh, because she thought she should have never touched something so sacred as Jesus.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it.
Never
Well-
should have touched him.
And every other time during her life, if she's been brought to the center of attention, it's been to condemn her.
Yeah,
Really, I mean, it's to tell her to be cast out, and somebody's gonna yell at her for making them. Somebody in that crowd probably knows who she is, so
Yeah.
knows her condition. These people are all going to know that I made them unclean.
Yeah.
Like he was calling her out, right? Like he was calling her out,
Yeah.
seeking her out.
yeah,
What did you do? Get over here. We're going to make this public.
yeah.
What you did.
And that's
She thought it
probably
a
what
very negative
everybody.
way.
Yeah, that's probably how most people would have talked to her, right? In this negative manner. We're going to cover that in a little bit. And I think all everything that you guys have said is the right answer. But I think there's more than that too. And this isn't something that I caught up either on my first go around of it. But there's a holy fear in her at this point, because she just recognized what just happened. I can't explain this. Who is Jesus? Who is he truly? Right? We're going to keep asking the question, because this is what Mark is doing here, right? Who is Jesus? And what does she do? Right? What does she do when he's called forward, right? And she decides to go to Jesus, right? In fear and trembling, she falls down in front of him.
And
She's-
she explains the whole situation.
She gives her testimony.
And everything
Yeah.
she went through, I bet.
Yep.
This is why I did this, Lord. I had to. I had no choice. You're
Yep.
my last shot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's the fear of the people and how they're going to react, but I think there's also this holy fear of her in Jesus, of just who is he? Who
And
is this
imagine
guy?
after the fear, after anybody who has that massive encounter, whether it be the transfiguration or anything that we read in the Bible, there is that humbleness that we get from having something happen to us that is so unexpected.
Yeah,
Can you imagine what she felt inside of her?
yeah. I think it's unimaginable, really, of
Right.
what she felt in that moment.
So many different ways.
And that light bulb just went on. Just, this is not, I knew he was special, but this is not who I thought he was. There's something different. And in that moment, why she became one of the elect, why she was saved, is because I think in that moment when she was healed, she knew. She intrinsically knew. She might have not been able to put the words into it, but she intrinsically knew Jesus was her savior. She already sought out Jesus, right, in that faith that Jesus was her savior, but then she knew. She had the experiential knowing and understanding of who Jesus was, and now she's shaking and trembling and falling down at his feet, in an act of worship, right? This is the second time that we've seen this in the story. Jairus did the exact same thing. He comes to Jesus in desperation. He falls down on his knees and begs Jesus, save my daughter. She does the exact same thing. She's coming to him in faith. She's healed. She falls to her knees and worships him. That's essentially what is happening here, is an act of worship. She is submitting herself to him, saying, you are greater than me. I might not even fully understand who you are right now, but you are greater than me, and I can't even look at you. I can't even be in the presence of you right now. I'm so afraid, but not in the afraid of punishment, but that holy fear of trembling and of reverential fear of the deity of Christ at this point. And so I think it kind of answers, why she came forward, is like she understood this, but I don't, Jesus, we don't get, it's text, so we don't really get, his tone and demeanor, but we can kind of pick up on that from verse 34, that he's not out there accusing her. He's probably stopping the crowd and said, who touched him? He's not condemning her, he's not yelling at her, he's not screaming, who had the nerve to touch me? He's looking around, just, wanting to have that, that encounter with her, seeking her out at this point, right? He's not doing it out of hate. He's not doing it out of anger. He's doing it out of love. And she would have been able to pick up on that, right? She would have been pick up on his tone, his demeanor, his body language, that Jesus doesn't mean her any harm. There's something different about him. He just wants to talk to me. And that gave her the confidence to move forward. Kind of as you talked about, Diane, like, it says the whole truth. She laid out her testimony right there in front of everybody. Everybody heard what Jesus had just done for her. Every step of it. And we get this now. Like, we get this, at the high level, but you can imagine she went into a lot more detail of everything that she had suffered in those 12 years. And we're going to get into a little bit of that, or some of the word choices that get used here to show, just how wretched of a soul this woman was. And then Jesus, calls her daughter. This is a term of endearment, but is the only recorded use of this term by Jesus. He does it. He calls another one a guy's son, but this is not something that he passes around. This is a tender term of endearment that he's using with her, but he's also indicating her adoption into God's family and the kingdom because of her faith. Yep. You are saved, and we're going to get into the word here too, that you start diving into the Greek on this, and it changes the story. This is not just about her being healed of a hemorrhage. This is about her salvation that is taking place right now. So that's kind of where we are right now, and this is kind of the meat of it, of where I've been leading us to all night. The significance of her of Jesus telling her faith has made her well. And so, we've been covering this, but in faith, the woman sought out Jesus. We talked about the tassels. We talked about the desperation. She put her whole faith in God at that point, that God was the only one that could save her. So she came to Jesus humbly and desperate, and recognized that Jesus was as her savior from everything that had burdened her. This woman's faith was not what caused the healing. And this is really, really important to understand this. It was not her faith that caused the healing, but was rather her faith in Jesus that allowed her to approach Jesus and receive what he had to offer, that allowed her to be healed by the Father's will. There's a and we're gonna dive into this a little bit more, but there is a false gospel that is out there that makes faith the object of our faith, not God and not Christ. God is the object of our faith. Faith alone will not heal you. Everybody there had faith. Faith alone will not save you. Everyone there had faith. It's a little bit different, and we're gonna dive into this. We're gonna go into the Westminster Confession of Faith. I was talking about this. So if there's questions on it, Diane, just, I saw you on mute. Let me get through it all, because I know it sounds okay.
I was just ramping up for the next couple verses.
Okay. So we've got this phrase here, made you well. And it's a translation of the word how do I pronounce this? Masikan. And it means to be saved or delivered. Right? So this is what is happening here. So when Jesus is saying your faith has made you well, he says your faith has saved you. Your faith has delivered you. There's a very important word choice that's being used here, because there is another word that Mark could use for healing. This is not the word that he uses. He uses the word for saved, for delivered. This is the Greek that is used all over the place when it's referring to our salvation. Jesus is saying your faith has saved you. Your faith has delivered you. Your faith has redeemed you. And then disease here is a translation of the Greek word, which means suffering, to torment, to whip, to scourge. It's the same word used to describe Jesus' scourging before the cross. So again, another, these are very interesting word choices that are getting used here, right? Your faith has delivered you from your torment. And it's not just a physical torment that she was facing, it was a spiritual torment. Remember, the blood was a constant reminder of her sin. Her sins have been washed away. This is before Christ is on the cross, right? But she has been saved. She has been redeemed. She's one of the elect. This commentary here by John Grasmick, dives into this a little bit further, and he says, Jesus attributed her cure to her faith rather than the touching of his clothing. Her faith healed her, literally as saved or delivered her, and that it caused her to seek healing from Jesus. Faith, confident trust, derives its value not from the one who expresses it, but the object in which it rests. And that, I want to read that again, because this is the most important part of what I'm going to be covering tonight. This is where we're all, heading towards in the last 2 hours at this point. It is faith, confident trust derives its value not from the one who expresses it, but from the object in which it rests. So our relationship with God is a two ways, but it is not equal. It wasn't simply the woman's faith that healed her. She did not force or trick God into healing her by sneaking up on Jesus and touching his garment. I think there's a lot of people that subscribe to faith healing and prosperity gospel that will look at that and say, I can do this. This is a method for me to receive some sort of healing, is I can trick God into doing this. God cannot be fooled. God cannot be mocked. This is not how this works. God responded directly to her faith, but it was still his decision alone how he would respond to that faith, and his decision alone to heal her. It's important for the woman. It was important for the woman and all who witness to see and understand this. God is not a trained monkey where we can get him to do our will whenever we want. It's not how this works. This is not our relationship with God, but this is a gospel that is preached today, right now. We can and should petition God, but we should be under no assumption that we can ever force or trick God into doing what we want. In the end, it's always God's will that will be done and not our own. So this is an incredibly important doctrinal issue. We are not gods. There's a little God philosophy and theology that is out there and is at the core of faith healing and prosperity gospel. We are not gods. We cannot do anything outside of the will of God. Faith alone cannot make God act outside of his sovereign will. Faith alone cannot make God act outside of his sovereign will. There are times that God's answers to our prayer for healing will be no. That's a bitter pill to swallow. There will be times that answer is no. How many times do you think that woman prayed to God for healing? How many times? And that answer in that moment was no. Why? Because that event needed to happen. Because all of that had to happen. Because this was a moment for her to spread faith, for other people to see. She had to suffer in that moment for something greater, for something bigger. We might not fully ever understand that, but it is a tough truth that his ways are not our ways. So there are so why that is, because sometimes it's going to be impossible to answer. Why God chooses to heal others while letting others suffer is that many times beyond our understanding. But it is a falsity to believe that God will always heal our sickness just because we have faith that he will. This is really important to understand. That he's not always going to heal us in the ways that we want physically. Paul had to learn to deal with this difficult lesson and accept that his suffering was part of God's ultimate plan for his life. He talks about this in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. He says, and this verse, is really important and really has always spoken to me. It says so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I've pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with my weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong.
Mhm.
That was Paul.
That was Paul saying that. So I challenge anyone out there to question Paul's faith as a reason that God didn't heal him. You did not have the faith of Paul. I can say that about everybody living right now. You did not have the faith of Paul. So how dare you question and say that Paul didn't have the faith to be healed? Because it's not faith that heals you. You cannot trick God. So this isn't to discount the importance of faith. There's a purpose, there's a reason behind it, but it's to ensure that God is the object of our faith, and that faith is not the object. Faith is not the object of our faith. God is able to do all, and all things are truly possible through God. But it's important to remember that God will only do his will to further his ultimate plan for humanity. If our prayer doesn't align with his will and ultimate goal, that answer to that prayer will be no, even if it makes little sense to us as why. So why is this important? Why am I focusing on this? Because faith is the instrumental cause, not the meritorious cause. The Westminster Confession of Faith states that faith, thus receiving and resting on Christ and his righteousness, is the alone instrument of justification. So this is from R.C. Sproul out of one of his books that I want to read. And he says, faith is not the grounds of our justification. The grounds of our justification is the righteousness of Christ, his merit. The Reformer said that the meritorious cause of our justification is the righteousness of Christ alone. The instrumental cause of our justification is faith. But when we say that we are justified by faith alone, we do not mean that faith is a meritorious work that adds anything to the grounds of our justification. That is why this is important. I've got another section to read here. It's because it is not our faith that makes God save us, because that would be a work. It's the instrument that leads us to the meritorious cause. It is what Christ did on the cross that saved us. It has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with what we have done. It is our faith that leads us there. We do not control God. And this, I know I'm getting, heated and worked up about this, but I've seen a lot of stuff recently with the prosperity gospel and faith healing that is destroying people's lives. They're lying to people. It is not the gospel. It is not the gospel.
Matt, I think that there's a fine line of the wording of what we're saying, because in order to come before God and have a belief that something's going to happen, you have to have faith. And Jesus brought that to the attention of the disciples, that faith was instrumental in accomplishing.
It's right. It's the instrument. It's the instrument that leads us there. That's the thing. It's still God that acts.
But I don't see the difference. I mean, I do see a difference in a believer and a non-believer. When I come to God for something and he doesn't give it to me, when I pray for it over and over again, I don't look at God as doing something wrong or not answering something that I wanted answered. I look at it that whatever reason God has, so be it. I understand that.
That's the point
that's the point, because that's the correct way to look at it. If you I'm not going to name names right now, but if you listen to some of these people that'll go out there, they will tell you that the reason you are sick, the reason you are not healed, is because you lack faith. That is a false gospel.
Yeah, okay,
that is a false gospel. And so R.C. Sproul goes on to this, and he basically is answering this question. So what difference does this make practically, right? It seems like it's not a big deal, right? He says there are people who say they believe in justification by faith alone, but who rely on their faith as it were a meritorious or good work that will satisfy the demands of God's justice. We know that's not the case. That is not the gospel. There is nothing that we could do to bridge that gap. It was Christ on the cross alone that was able to do that. So the fact that a person possesses faith adds no merit to his account. None. It adds infinite merit to his account by imputation, but it is the merit of Christ that is imputed to him. We can receive Christ's merit only by faith, and there is no merit to that. The only one who can save us is Christ, and the only way we can get access to him is through faith. We do not rest on anything else in our lives except Christ and his righteousness for our salvation. So that's why it's important, is to understand, yes, faith is the instrument that gets us there, but it's not a work. It's not something that can be credited to us. The only credit that we receive is because Christ himself died on that cross for us, that he has imputed his righteousness onto us through his act, not ours. That is it's really important to understand that. It's because, you know, there's a lot of just falsities in this. It's the little gods concept. It's that faith that I can force God to do whatever I want if I just have enough faith. It is making us gods. And what was the first sin man did? What was the underlying reason for our fall?
Because we believe we could be equal with God if we ate the fruit.
Yeah, we wanted to be like God. And so what is that gospel preaching? What is that fake, false gospel preaching? That you can be just like God, that we're little gods, that we can manifest things with our faith, that we can say things that God is not sovereign, we are. It's
right.
A false gospel.
I think for me, a better illustration of that would be is if you try to heal somebody and they do become healed, you take no credit for that.
Yep.
That credit is from God. You're just the instrument that bridges the gap between that human being and our Father.
Yep. That's the whole point of it.
Is that what you're saying, sort of?
Yeah,
and,
it's
the other
go
point
ahead, Ma.
is if God doesn't heal us, then that's God's will, not we're not forcing God. We don't go tell God he's got to heal us because he doesn't have to.
Yeah, but that's impossible to do anyway.
That's
right. You're
right.
That's what he's
Foolishness.
saying.
Yeah, but what happens with that? If you pray to God, he doesn't give you what you want, and you walk away saying, "Oh, now I don't believe in you because you didn't give me what I wanted." Is that what you're saying?
That's what. Yeah, this is an outcome for a lot of people, is that when they think that this is what the gospel says, that I can force God to do what I want, and then what God does not do what they want, they say, well, then what use is God for me? And they walk away.
Now I get it. Okay.
And you know, and this goes into these people that they're stealing money from people. One of the, you know, the very important things that we're told to do is take care of widows and orphans. And these people target widows and orphans to take their money from them. And they organize and engineer all of these things to make it. There's a guy.
But those are believers, Matt. Those are believers. If you believed in God and had a healthy fear of the Lord, you would never do that.
Right, you would never do that. But the problem is that they're
unbelievers. They're simply unbelievers. They don't believe in God.
My issue, you know, I do have an issue with them. But my bigger concern, you know, and because God's going to handle them one day. My bigger concern is the people that they're leading astray. The people that lives they are destroying by what they're doing, because, you know, all these so-called,
if you give money, if you give us money, God's going to listen to you.
Yeah, it's
all about you giving to me. So, and then you're going to be healed. It's like you're buying your healing.
Exactly. No, exactly. And this is people that they're taking advantage of these people, and they're doing it in a way that, you know, is highly engineered to do this. There's I talked to Jenny about this. His name is Justin Peters. He's a pastor down in Texas, and he's been really big on exposing this. He has cerebral palsy, and it's visible cerebral palsy. He has gone to some of these faith healers, and he's exposed, like with a hidden camera, on what they do. If there's somebody that has a physical, visible ailment, they get screened out immediately. They'll never go up on that stage. And so the people that go up on that stage, there's nothing physically, visibly wrong with them. And so when these people go and they're pretending to heal them, everybody's looking around saying, wow, they're healed, and it's a miraculous. While the people that are in wheelchairs, the people that are struggling with cerebral palsy and multiple sclerosis, that are trapped inside their body, that could use a healing like that if it was real, are being cast aside, because what better way to show them up as fake as going up to somebody as to try to have somebody stand up and walk that has no use of their legs. But people don't see that. They don't see that happening, and they say, well, I'm sick, I'm hurting, let me give my last dollar to them. While they preach this fake gospel. And this is, there's the extreme examples of it, of, the people that are, billionaires, making money off of this. But we're seeing it in our own local churches here right now. And the problem that I have with it is it focuses people on the material world. It is telling them that this is your best life right here. That is not the gospel. This is not the gospel. This is not our best life.
And Matt, that's never going to change, honey.
It's
know that that exposing it's a travesty. You and I can watch these people on television and in 5 minutes know they're charlatans.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're a Trump fan, I'm sorry.
On that note,
anyways,
we haven't eaten dinner yet.
Yeah.
It's 9:30.
So Matt, this has been exceptional. I have to say that. And I want to, just a little sidebar, love the bigger font for us old ladies in the audience. And also the red letters. Nice, Matt. Really nice. And so I'm really happy that I showed up tonight, because it was exceptional. These small groups have a lot of value.
This is my my fired up day on it.
No,
I was
man,
just this has been
stay fired up
all
to
over.
the day you die, Matt. You stay fired up.
I'm telling you, this was not planned. This was this where I went with this starting Monday was not planned. But
I'm
God,
sorry about the Trump thing.
but God kept throwing things at me. Like the last week, I've been like constantly exposed to this, and then I saw that statement, and I said, God's telling me what I need to say right now. This is I've got to clarify this.
Calling because somebody needs to stand up and expose these people. But you know what, man? It's just like the people that call the warning sign flashes on your computer that you've got a virus, and you call these people, or they call and tell you that you've been breached. That's no difference. They're taking billions of dollars from unfortunate people.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, you can't make somebody believe something or disbelieve something they so badly want to believe.
Yeah.
It's so sad. But God will take care of all that. Don't you even worry, man.
No, I know. So like I said, I'm not concerned with the people that are out there doing it, because they're going to have to face God for all they've done one day.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
his wrath is great. And they'll get what has coming to them.
Everybody has judgment. That's right. Go and eat.
Yeah. And for me, I want to preach the real gospel.
Oh, you got
That's all I care.
First?
Yes.
Yeah. It's going to be 50.
That crockpot out, Jenny, long ago.
So I'd like to point out that I never cook. I hardly ever cook. Matt really does take care of all of that stuff.
Nice. That's what I'm talking about.
But on that note, we also owe you a dinner, a time to come
That's
over
what I'm
and meet
talking
Matt.